So welcome to the discussion that I put together for the Denali climb I did this past spring. This recording, for those that came to the original, will look different because the recording disappeared. So I'm doing this again so I can get a recording out to everybody like I promised that I would. So here goes. So I went up to Denali with a team of 5 people this spring from the last week of May through the second week in June. It was a 20-day trip. It was what we had planned. Our plan was to ski from as high on the mountain as possible and spend as much time skiing and then hopefully summit weather permitting. What ended up happening is we did not summit because there were a few minimal weather windows and almost nobody summited during the time period that we were up there, and our summit window was open. So the purpose of this workshop is to take you through the planning process and the planning that we did leading into the trip, and then to show you some of what worked and some of what didn't, in addition to lessons learned. So the first thing is, like, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The enemy in this case being the reality of the conditions and the weather and the mountain. A plan is a place to shift from. It is not what you must do. The purpose of planning is so that everybody is on the same page, and that's why it is important. Then in preparing for battle, I've always found that the plans are useless and the planning is indispensable. This just adds on to that, where it gets the team on one page, it gives you metrics to make decisions from, and identifies key decision points so that when stress rises and that summit fever might start to set in, you can circle back to the planning that you have done and know that your team is making a better decision than you would otherwise be making. The key thing with the Denali is it's just a big mountain. It is a huge, huge mountain compared to everything else that we have in the United States. So looking at some of the terrain in these pictures, just Mount Rainier is one of the main mountains that people will hit before heading up to Denali if you're coming from the continental US. And that is also a big mountain, but it's just dwarfed in scale by how big Denali is. Like the snow fields, the glaciers, the crevasses, it's all just bigger. Denali tops out over 20,200 feet. So you just need to spend more time on the mountain getting acclimated. For those coming from sea level, that acclimation time period is even more important than those coming from above 5,000-6,000 feet elevation. That's going to slow you down a few days in your itinerary. But this year on Rainier and on Denali, the Park Service did more rescues for high altitude sickness and high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude cerebral edema, HAPE and HACE, than they have in previous years. And the one thing that they've been able to identify anecdotally is that people are coming from sea level and using altitude meds more as a performance enhancing drug than as a preventative when required. So make sure that you are being smart with your acclimation and being conservative with it as you go. So my background and why I decided to give this class and workshop is I have 14 years of military experience, 10 of those being active duty as an officer, and planning operations is a huge part of my job there. The other side, I'm apprentice rock guide and an apprentice ski guide, certified through the AMGA, and have over 32 years of skiing with almost a decade of that now being in the backcountry with both ski patrol and guiding experience. So I was able to bring all that to creating the plan that we're about to talk that our team used for our self-guided trip on Denali. Ultimate purpose of this class is to build your speed, safety, and confidence on this trip or future expeditions that you may go on. Doing that by sharing a planning example, answering your questions, and then building trust so that you're willing to reach out when you have questions as you're going through your process of getting ready for Denali and or preparing and planning your own expedition or trip. Our overall agenda is we're going to hit an overview of Denali so you understand the mountain, in Cal Topo. Then we're going to go over our team's approach and plan using a Google Sheet before we talk some of the fitness prep, equipment, and lessons learned from this trip as a whole. So here's the Cal Topo map of the Kahiltna Glacier and Denali. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see the link that you can use to use this map. Additionally, this map link is posted on the Tactical Alpinism Instagram page in the link tree under Denali Maps. So the reason I pulled up this map is before going, one of the key things to identifying the fitness you need and the equipment you need is understanding the full problem set that you're trying to solve. So down here at the bottom, we have the terrain profile for the entire West Buttress route. So if you look at the top, it's a 15.4 miles approximately, with almost 14,000 feet of elevation gain from the airport on the Kahiltna Glacier where the base camp is, and all the planes come in, to the summit. Generally, this is accomplished over 10 to 20 days for acclimation purposes and hauling all your gear to and from the higher camps. Where it's broken down is we start by flying into the base camp at the Kahiltna Airport, and we fly in there because that's where the national park boundary is, and there's no motorized access allowed within the park. Then most people will move to Camp 1 on that first day, or depending on how late it is, they might move later. One thing to note is that this lower glacier gets really, really warm. So on the lower glacier, it's actually sometimes better to move in the evening after the sun is set to keep that temperature down. Now, if you see the moving red dot on the screen, Camp 1 gets us in at 1,000 feet of elevation gain with almost 500 feet of elevation loss, and that's coming down Heartbreak Hill, and it's about 5 miles in. So this is the longest movement distance-wise that you'll make between camps during the time here, but also as the least elevation change. The getting from the airport to Camp 1 and then from Camp 1 to Camp 3 for us took about the same amount of time. Going from Camp 1 to Camp 2, you have another 1,500-ish feet of elevation gain and 2 miles of horizontal distance covered. Getting up to Camp 3 from Camp 1, you have about 3,000, a little more than 3,000 feet of elevation gain and 4 miles covered to get up to Camp 3, the 11,000 foot camp. Now, the thing to note about really between Camp 1 and Camp 2 is that it's fairly flat with like little bits of steepness, the steepest part being right before you get to Camp 3. Zooming in up here from Camp 3 to 14,000 feet, you'll note that we have a few sections of steeper area coming right out of Camp 3. So first you have Motorcycle Hill, not too steep, definitely some crevasses in there. So most parties do rope up, or the majority of parties. And then for us, the crux of the trip was actually Squirrel Hill because it was white and blue ice. And it's off camber, so you'll notice right here, right above where it says Squirrel Motorcycle Hill, there's a cliff where the terrain gets steeper, denoted by the darker shading. And that is a cliff that the terrain will actually push you down and over if you take a fall. So this is not an area to fall. And for us, because it was white and blue ice, it was the crux of the trip. The typical crux for most people is when you get to Windy Corner, because Windy Corner is also very off camber. You have a fall line that's pulling you downhill while you're trying to traverse. So I've talked to friends who have had a super easy time here, and I've talked to friends who have crossed Windy Corner in blue ice where they're placing screws, ice screws between them as they moved across. So the key thing here is just like have the tools in your tool bag to be able to react to the conditions as you go. Once you get from Windy Corner or from Camp 3 to Camp 4 at 14,000 feet, so we go up another 3,000 feet of elevation gain, a little bit less than 3,000 feet of elevation gain. and about 4 miles of distance, 3 to 4 miles of distance. So distance wise, the shortest move, about the same size day as moving to 11 camp, but you're moving through slightly more technical terrain. Finally, we're looking from 14,000 feet up towards the summit. So from 14,000 foot camp, or what we were calling Camp 4, if you're taking the West Buttress route, you'll move up to where the fixed lines start, which is where the red dot that's been moving is now. Then you'll take your fixed lines up onto the West Buttress proper. That whole ridge line that you're seeing here, that is the West Buttress and the namesake of the total route. As you continue moving, you'll end up hitting 17,000 foot camp. Most people will make a camp here as well. And then you'll continue moving up to the summit at a little bit over 12,000, a little bit over 20,200 feet. Majority of parties will descend from the summit the exact same way that they went up. For us, we ended up skiing down Rescue Gully here from our summit attempts, because our goal of skiing one of the main lines, either the Orient Express or the Messner Couloir, both of those were just blue ice this season, and so we weren't able to even give them an attempt. So that's the base overview of what the area looks like and what some of the named features are that I'll be hitting as we go through the itinerary. So moving into the itinerary, so this is our conservative acclimation itinerary, and it's the one that our team ended up going with. So day 0, we arrived in Anchorage and started to get some of our food and equipment downloaded at a friend's garage. And then next day, once everybody was there, we started breaking out to get last minute gear and also to get all of our food together. The way we broke out our food was by day, by person. So we did breakfast, lunch, dinner per day, and each person was responsible for a certain amount of the meals. Looking at our plan, we had 19 breakfasts and 20 dinners and lunches planned for the whole trip based on the number of days that we were going to be on the mountain. One of those lunches ended up getting eaten at the air taxi while we're waiting to fly out. This planning that we did is in the Denali sheet, Google sheet that y'all have access to. So for the itinerary, we got our food prep based off of that list. Each person who had planned the meal was responsible for tossing the items that they would need to buy into a grocery list, and the people who arrived earlier were the ones that went and picked it up. Day 2, we had driven up to Talkeetna the night before. It's about a 2-hour drive from Anchorage, and if you don't have a vehicle when you're up there, there are shuttles that run from Anchorage to Talkeetna for climbers and for tourist use. Those are about $80 round trip, if I remember correctly. Our timeline ended up working out. There hadn't been flights into the glacier for a few days, and we ended up flying in exactly at the time we had planned. The key thing is that for us, the air taxi told us to check back in at 12:30, and because the weather was shaping up, we were caught a little bit unready because they came over to where we were setting our gear and we're like, hey, it's 12:30. Where's the 12:30 group? Let's go. The weather's clear. So once you're at the air taxi and you've checked in, just be ready to go on like aggressive standby when you're there. That day we moved to Camp 1 and set up camp and then stayed at Camp 1. We also moved a gear cache to Camp 2 on our second day on the mountain. So now we're on to days on the mountain, climbing days. And then we moved to Camp 3. From there, we actually didn't place a cache higher. We dropped back down to grab our cache that was at Camp 2. And that allowed a recovery day for most of us, because it's about 1,000 feet of elevation gain and loss from where that cache was. And then we ended up getting weathered in for a few days. correction. We on day 5, we placed our cache at 13,000 feet, and then we ended up getting weathered in for a few days until about day 9 or 10 before we could actually move up to 14,000 feet because the 11,000 foot camp, like kind of as it does with the weather there, it's just gets socked in. And so some of the guides call it sad camp because you can just get stuck there with the way that the weather levels end up setting up on the mountain, which is what happened to us for a few days. But our plan was to have a minimum of 3 nights at 11,000 feet for the purpose of acclimation and preventing altitude sickness. And having those additional days, like having more days at 11 does not hurt. It only gets it so that you feel better when you get to 14,000 feet. And so none of the people on the team had any altitude issues or headaches once we got to 14,000. We felt the worst at 11 for the first few days there, and then like felt great once we got to 14,000 feet. So those additional days of acclimation are underrated. And I would argue if you have the opportunity, take them. From here, we played it generally by ear, but our metric for saying that our summit window was open was 2 days above 16,000 feet. So we got at least 2 days above 16,000 feet in before we made a summit attempt. We did not go up above 17 or up to 17 because of the way the weather was sitting for all those days. But we did one tour up above 15 and then 2 above 16,000 feet. On our summit day, we had okay weather, and it was looking like there was going to be about a 12-hour weather window. Our plan was not to do a move to 17,000 foot camp like most people do. Our plan was to do a move to the summit from 14,000 feet. So that's where some of our fitness requirements will come in. I'll talk those in a little bit, but that's a 6,000 vertical foot day at 14 to 20,000 feet. So it's a big day. And we made 2 summit attempts as a team. I only went on one of them. We made 2 summit attempts as a team. Both of them ended at between 17 and 18,000 feet because of high winds and weather moving in, even though we thought we had a 12 to 14 hour weather window. Just the weather did not line up for us. So we ended up skiing a bunch and not ended up tagging the summit. The cool thing is that because the way the wind was rolling through is we got great skiing both below the upper west rib and below and in Rescue Gully, because those just kept filling in with wind-blown snow. Finally, we ended up, because of the way the team was feeling, we ended up descending a few days early, about day 17 or 18, and then flew out. We descended a little bit early because there was potential weather coming in again, and it looked like there was going to be a single day weather window, which we did nail the single day weather window to get out, which for our team was important because one member of the team had a wedding a week later. Okay, so we've hit our overview of Denali in Cal Topo and the approach and plan that we took to it. Now we're going to tag some of the fitness requirements. So key thing was we identified the main problem, which was climb 13,000 feet over 15 miles. And the second was that 6,000 vertical foot day from 14,000 feet to the summit. Third was 3 big move days with a sled and about 3,000 vertical feet with a 90-pound sled on those 3 big move days. So each of those big move days ended up taking between 5 and 8 hours from the airport to Camp 1 was about 5 hours. And then from Camp 1 to Camp 3 at 11,000 feet was close to 8. And then from Camp 3 at 11 to Camp 4 at 14 was, again, about 8 hours for us to move with those sleds, even though unloaded on our cache day from 11,000 feet to 13. We did that in under 3 hours, even with high winds and pretty terrible conditions. It just went a lot faster without the sleds. So if you are able to, I'd highly recommend double carrying, i.e., not using the sleds at all from 11,000 feet to 14. However, if you have too much stuff like we did, our base weight was 150 pounds per person, including our skis. So 140 pounds between our backpack and our sled. We just had too much. A planning factor there is about 125 pounds is kind of where you want to be sitting. Anyways, for our fitness metrics, one, we had climbed 13,000 vertical feet over 2 back-to-back days. The reason we did it over 2 back-to-back days instead of one big day is we wanted to show the ability to recover and repeat the effort again the following day. Second was climb at a rate of 2,000 vertical feet per hour for 3 hours at the altitude you were living at. So that for most of us was done ski touring. Actually, all of us, that was done ski touring. If you don't have the ability to do it ski touring and you have, say, like a Stairmaster, or you don't have access to elevation, then you'd want to up that number if you're planning on going from 14,000 feet. What that translates to is about 1,000 feet per hour, or even a little bit less once you're up above 14,000 feet and partially acclimated on Denali. And finally, the final one, which we probably could have increased our metric a little bit, was rig and drag a sled at least 1,000 vertical feet. The key thing here was honestly was rigging the sled so that it wasn't something you were figuring out on the mountain. The drag in the sled, you just move a lot slower. And for those that are looking at skiing, I'd recommend bringing slightly heavier gear, not necessarily a super lightweight setup. One, because the pace is just so slow on this mountain. And then two, because of the sheer amount of stuff that you are carrying with you. So my skiing setup was a 1,400 to 1,500 gram ski with about a 350 gram binding, which is not the lightest weight setup. It's a fairly light setup, but definitely not the lightest. So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily need the lightest setup because it's going to do better in the variable snow you're going to be skiing on, and with durability when it comes to moving all this equipment that you're going to be moving throughout your time on the mountain. Okay, so some of the key lessons learned, and then we'll go into heroes of the battle, or the gear that worked really well for us. So the first is at 11 camp, we had a crevasse fall in camp. So we had gotten sucked into or lulled into a false feeling of security because we set up in a camp that somebody else had used with wind walls and everything. So as I was digging a cook shelter and digging down about a meter from the surface, I ended up punching through into a massive crevasse. Luckily, my armpits caught, but the crevasse was huge. It was towards the top of 11,000 foot camp. And we would have been fine set up as we were with our tents if we hadn't sawed away over a meter worth, actually close to 1.5 meters, 2 meters of the snow bridge as we were building our cook shelter. But what we took away from that was every area that we stopped, both camp and for rests, we made sure that we were really diligent about probing the area to ensure it was safe for us to pop out of our skis or to set up camp there. On a glacier, a crevasse, when you're probing, will feel quite a bit different than the different snow layers, but it takes a fine-tuned feel to notice where that change happens. Generally, what the feel is when you're probing down, you'll feel all the different layers as you go, where it's stiffer, stiffer, not as stiff, stiffer, stiffer, not as stiff, and you'll feel different layers. When that turns into a mushy, like consistent pressure where there's now no change, that's where you have a crevasse because there's no resistance to the tip of that probe anymore. Weather. So weather was fairly just unpredictable, especially above 14,000 feet. We had a general weather update coming in from the National Park Service on the weather board that they have at 14,000 feet, and it's the same weather report they read over the radio every evening. But That weather report is fairly general. It's pulled from NOAA, and the mountain creates its own weather. We also had another team whose father is a high altitude meteorologist, and he was giving us very detailed weather updates. And even those updates were not completely accurate. We had a few like small weather windows that we thought were going to be showing up based off those reports, and they just did not show up. The weather did come across pretty accurate 11,000 feet and below, but once you got above 14, it was not super accurate. It's more you had to step out of your tent and look for what was happening up high. The key thing is if you see winds coming off the top of the mountain, or you see a lenticular cloud, a cloud that looks like a contact lens sitting over the top of the mountain, both of those are indicators of high winds, and do not go up and use that as a summit day. Ski falls, we had 3 different ski falls occur while we were up there. One was our team. One member of our team was not as comfortable on more challenging snow types, hit a patch of white ice when he was skiing a little bit faster than he should have, and tomahawked a few times before finally self-arresting. This was just below Rescue Gully, and we got really lucky. He didn't lose his skis. His leashes stayed on. But a day later, another team went up and skied that area and also took a fall. And that team, one of the skiers, lost a ski to the crevasse monster. So just the takeaway from that is if you're skiing up there, like know that the conditions are going to be super variable. You need to be in control, and you need to be super solid on all snow types. If you don't have experience skiing on high mountains like other 14ers at a minimum, then you need to get some time on those mountains before you can say that you're confident going up. Because even those that can ski double black diamonds in the resort, you are going to be dealing with significantly variable snow and terrain conditions, and you just need to be solid up there. The third ski fall turned into a rescue. This was on the Autobahn, which is one of the features going from 17,000 feet to the summit. And he caught an edge and ended up sliding over 1,000 feet, losing a glove in the process and being hurt enough and having lost enough equipment that he could not walk back down. So while he was waiting for a rescue, ended up getting frostbite on his hand because he was out of it enough that he didn't realize his hand was out, and neither did his team or the people that were picking him up. So he ended up getting frostbite on that hand. But again, it's like you just need to be solid on all conditions and be able to control jump turns and side slips incredibly well. Group goals and dynamics. So group dynamics is super important up there. And as one of my friends, Miles, who's also a guide, said, is Denali's a unique pressure cooker for group dynamics and like a study of group dynamics. So we had an instance where our team was not 100% on the same page with the goals, where certain members wanted to, like, summiting was the only priority. And then once we had some members of the team where their priority was skiing a bunch and then summiting. And as soon as they got up to 14,000 feet, they realized how serious the terrain was, and were not anywhere near as interested in skiing, and that just shifted to summiting. So the varied abilities within the group caused a little bit of tension until we were able to talk it through and make adjustments, especially based off some of those ski falls that had occurred on the mountain. At 14,000 feet for temperature and real feel, at 7,000 feet on the lower glacier was the warmest that I was on the mountain. And even though it was 40 degrees, it felt like we were in a greenhouse because of the impact of the low clouds and then the snow reflecting the sun shortwave radiation. So essentially it just turned the whole thing into a greenhouse. It was just humid and hot and uncomfortable. Whereas once we got up to 14,000 feet and on clear days, it was 0 degrees or minus 10 degrees at times, but you could be walking around in a sun hoodie as long as the sun was out because of just how powerful the solar radiation was. For sleds, the key thing there is like get experience before you go, both dragon, but especially if you're skiing heading downhill. For those that had ski patrol experience on our trip, heading downhill with the sleds was significantly easier. And if you don't have ski patrol experience, if best option would be to get out to your local hill and see if the ski patrol would be willing to teach you how to use a toboggan. Get out to the local ski hill and see if the ski patrol would be willing to give you a lesson in using a toboggan, so you can take some of those lessons forward to using a sled on Denali. Finally, food, snacks, and fueling. The biggest mistake that I feel I made on this trip was I brought snacks and food that I eat pretty well down at lower elevations and in the continental US. And just when I got up to Denali and when we got up to 14,000 feet, for whatever reason, I could not stomach those snacks, specifically the gels, chews, and some of the bars. I was like, they were fine, but they weren't a thing that I looked forward to eating while we were moving on other mountains. So the things I was willing to eat were chocolate bars and the things that I look forward to and enjoy eating on the lower mountains. So if you have any hesitation on eating, for at least for me, if I have any hesitation on eating a thing in the lower 48, or it's like something I like have to remind myself to eat, then that is not something I am going to bring up on future trips to this kind of altitude. All right, heroes of the trip. So these are some of the key pieces of equipment. So first one, we have the Thermarest Polar Ranger. It's a -20 bag, and it was the warmest bag that we had on the trip. Even though it was a -20, we had some -35, some -40s. It's fully down. It's the lightest, and it packs the smallest. Most of the other bags packed in 25 to 35 liter stuff sacks, whereas this one packed in about a 10 to 15 liter space. So just this bag was amazing and was the warmest one that we had on the trip. Next one was the puffy shorts. It makes it so you don't have to wear a mid layer, and the puffy shorts make it so you don't have to wear a mid layer, and you can toss them on to adjust for wind and changing temperatures as they move without really needing ever to stop like you would with having to like add or remove a mid layer. They also offer a lot more just flexibility than tossing on puffy pants. They offer a lot more flexibility than just puffy pants. The next ones are, there's two in this image in the center with me here. You have the face glove Flex, which is the nose cover you see me wearing. That's from Outer U. And then in the sun hoodies, even on the lower glacier and on the upper mountain, both were awesome. And just made it so we didn't have to crush through as much sunscreen, and generally kept us well protected. Finally, on this page, we have the XGK from MSR. It is a higher output stove meant specifically for high altitude and cold weather. And we use two of these below our water or our snow in order to melt it for water. It just made the snow melting process so much faster than a Whisper Light. If you have a party of, say, 3, then probably one XGK and one Whisper Light would be the way to go, because you aren't melting as much snow, and that Whisper Light keeps the ability for you to simmer food at the higher elevations. The planning factor for stoves is 1 stove per 2 people. If you only have a 2-person team or 3-person team going, it's highly recommended to have a backup stove. Okay, ski scraper or wax scraper. Ice just gets everywhere with the sun and the changing temperatures and the cold temps. Ice just really gets everywhere. So with skis especially, but even snowshoes and other pieces of gear, having that scraper made it so it was really easy to clear out ice and debris from within our equipment. And for our team, the one scraper we had became sort of a joke that we were handing it around to everybody as they were transitioning. Black Diamond mission tent, we had a Trango 3 and the Black Diamond 3 person tent, and the Black Diamond 3-person tent for us worked way better than the Trango 3 because it's a true 3-person tent, whereas the Trango 3 is a tight 3-person tent. It's really more like a 2.5-person tent, so you can fit 3. But the Black Diamond mission, we had 3 in it, and we had the space to not be all over each other when we were using the tent. Plus, has 2 full big-sized vestibules that you can go in and out. It was just a solid tent for up on the mountain. Final one is just beverage flavoring things and rehydration powders. Drip Drop is my personal favorite. Also used a lot of hot chocolate up there. Just making sure that you have plenty of things to add to your water to help you continue to drink as much water as you need. All right, so at this point, I'm going to transition into the Q&A that I recorded on the initial call. Okay, so that's gets to the conclusion of the formal stuff that I was going to talk. So I'm going to open it up to y'all's questions and areas that I can maybe add a little bit more clarity or information to that you're curious about. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask them or put them into the chat.
All right, this is Chris Stevens.
Right on. How you doing, Chris?
Good, buddy. Hey, so can you just run over real quick? And I know you probably have it in the breakdown, but how many days were you at each one of the camps? It's kind of, and I know you got it kind of on the schedule breakdown, but it's like a little hard for me to see.
Yeah, sure thing. So the plan was for us to be at Camp 1 for 2 nights because we were going to go to Camp 1, cache the second day, and then sleep at Camp 1 again. That was for acclimation purposes for our sea level folks because Camp 1 is at 7,800 feet. We then skipped Camp 2 and went to Camp 3 and spent 6 total nights at Camp 3. The plan was for a minimum of 3 before we moved up. But with weather, we ended up being up there for 6. Looking back, based on the fitness of our group and the ability to move the sleds, the change I would make is I would actually skip Camp 1 if conditions and timing allow and go up to about 9,000 to 10,000 feet and camp there for 2 nights before I push up to 11, because that just makes the move to 11 a lot less arduous. And moving from 7,800 Camp 1 to 11,000 is just a long, nearly flat slog. Even though you're gaining elevation, that's the second flattest part of the trip, and it just feels really long. So I would have spent more time at 9,000 or 10,000 feet, which the Camp 2 area is more fairly general. It's not commonly used, and it's a sort of a longer, flatter area. So like there is like one pod of air space that people stop at, but you can really stop anywhere along that like 9,000 and 10,000 foot elevation zone. From 11,000 feet, during our time there, we did push one cache up to 13,500, and we also dropped down to 9,000 to pick up the cache that we had dropped while we were at 11,000. So that accounted for 2 of our days at the 11,000 foot camp, and then weather roll came in, so we weren't able to move higher. Once we did move higher, we ended up having about a week and a half where we were camped at 14,000 feet and then making our pushes from there. Once we decided to make our way down, we had allocated 1 full day for our movement back to the Kahiltna airport. And for us on skis, that was completely doable. For people on snowshoes, they'll sometimes allocate 2 days for that descent because you're spending a lot more energy on the way down. A lot of guided parties on snowshoes will also do that. They'll move down to 11,000 feet, sleep there for a partial day or a few hours, and then start moving again at 9 or 10 p.m. when the sun is off the glacier, so the heat on that lower glacier is mitigated. Did I hit the points that you were curious about, Chris?
Yeah, awesome. And I've got one more for you as far as like, so I'm pretty handy on a split board, but I don't necessarily want to do this on a split board. But what I've been playing around with the idea is getting a set of skis to skin up and then to like walk back down. What's the speed difference as far as like movement on snowshoes versus skis that you saw with like your team versus anybody who was on snowshoes going up?
To be honest, it's less about speed and more
Or
about
efficiency.
mitigating. So Chris, it's less about speed. Generally the teams moved about the same speed on the way up due to the weight of the sleds. There's a touch more efficiency on skis, but not really much with just how heavy those sleds are. And when you get to some of the steeper terrain, like the hill that's right below 11,000 feet,
Yeah,
you actually could lose some efficiency with the skis. But
for
the
sure.
main thing you
Yeah,
gain,
that was with the weight.
can you say that again? You were breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at with the weight of the sled.
Yep.
Is it, in your opinion, worth you gain? What like is your margin there to make it worth the time? Obviously, that comes with experience and everything, but just kind of getting your opinion on it.
Yeah, so I don't think the time is any different. What you do gain is mitigating the risk of crevasse falls. Because on skis or a split board, your risk of crevasse falls is significantly decreased because of the amount of surface area that you cover. There is nobody on the trip that I was on skis that took any crevasse falls, and there were, even though the bridges were super thick, there were crevasse falls for people that are either foot based or snowshoe based.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. That answers perfectly. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Chris, a lot of people that don't want to like ski or split board the upper mountain, they'll bring in their skis and split boards to 11,000 feet and then cache them there.
Yeah, that was my initial thought is to get up to a certain point to where I'm comfortable moving and then cache them there for the rest and then pick them up on the way back down.
Yeah, and if you're not comfortable on skis on the way down, you definitely don't want to attempt skiing Squirrel Hill or Windy Corner.
Absolutely not.
Thanks for the question, Chris. What else we got, team?
Hey, Maury, I got one for you.
Yeah, shoot, John.
Two, actually. So the first one is, again, a split board question. How'd you split board or do with the sled? Because I know, obviously, like maneuvering, I've done both with the sled, both ski and snowboard, but it's a completely different ball game. And I found snowboarding with the sled to be a big bear compared to ski.
Yeah, sure. So first, I'd say if you have the opportunity to make friends with ski patrollers, do it and get some practice just working with a sled. Even though the experience is different because the ski patrol sled, it has fixed handles on the front, and you're probably going to have a rope on the front of your Denali sled, but you still get that experience. What we did on the way down, the way up, there is really no difference. Um, the biggest difference being that split boards are generally just heavier, so they're a little bit more fatiguing. On the way down, the what we did is we actually consolidated our sleds. So for our team of 5, we had 3 sleds we were bringing down because we were now lighter on food by a lot. And the split boarder was our tail roper for one of the sleds. So I have ski patrol experience, so I went solo with a sled on the way down, and then the other 2 teams who didn't have as much experience with sleds used a tail gunner or a tail roper. So we used the split boarder as a tail roper so that he had the ability to move instead of having to drag a sled.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had another one, which was about kind of the snacks thing that you were talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about using basically liquid-based calories a lot more often, and I heard you talking about how the snacks that you brought, it sounded like were a lot of like almost like endurance snacks, right? Like chews, goos, etc. Was that were you specifically talking more about for like snacks on the move, or was it also in camp snacks? And sort of a dovetail to that is like, do you think that by bringing highly desirable junk calories, right? If weight versus calorie makes sense on the food item, that would have been better than some of those.
Yeah, for me, the things that I was willing to eat while on the move, especially, were like candy bars, and like chocolate that I really liked. And then the liquid calories such as hot chocolate or the drip drop, or you have some examples like Scratch's super high carb recovery mix. So that the liquid calories were what I was just able to stomach for whatever reason. The like sort of shot block style chews or the scratch chews, like I normally really enjoy and like those things and function well off them. For whatever reason, they almost induced nausea for me while I was up on the mountain, and they just did not work for me. even though they're essentially like gummy bears. Just for me, they did not work up there. So that was specifically on the move snacks. As far as calories, I didn't talk this, but we planned for 3,500 calories in meals per person per day as our planning factor. And then 500 to maybe a little bit more if people want more calories in snacks and hot beverages. The hot beverages are absolutely a thing that we would continue and sustain from this. We brought a mix of chai latte powder from Trader Joe's, hot chocolate, hot drip drop, coffee, and then things that other people wanted. The coffee ended up being a great bargaining tool up at 14 camp, where you kind of have a pretty solid barter system as people are getting ready to go up, or excuse me, go down. They're going to be like trying to hand off gas and wait before they go down. So you can fairly reliably find stuff that you need up there or barter for stuff that you need.
Nice. So I mean, it sounds like what you're telling me is like the candy bars, basically like, it's worth it to be doing a little bit of like the sugar and the straight junk food because it's gonna be super palatable and easy to digest.
Yeah, and for me also, I've tested my like nutrition systems at
Sure.
lower altitude. And what I've noticed is that generally, like I had that experience when I went up 14,000 feet, whereas like I didn't necessarily want to eat these things all that much, but I was just like, maybe it was dehydration, maybe it was like just that day.
Yeah.
But that like little indicator of like, I'm not wanting to eat these as much, translated into I like couldn't stomach them when I got higher than 14,000 feet. So
Yeah.
the like spending a little bit of time at altitude and paying attention to those little indicators, they just get enhanced as you go higher.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and for me, like the other piece that like really didn't sit well and why I think I had like sort of this stomach distress on the attempted summit day where we turned around, or where myself and one teammate turned around, was because of the powdered milk. Like I usually really like Backpackers Pantry, the granola they have with powdered milk, and that usually digests and sits really well for me. And like I just had like really bad like bubble guts on that day and felt super, super slow compared to the team in my normal pace. And luckily I had a team member, my cousin, who was more interested in like us sticking together as a team, even though he was feeling phenomenal. So he turned around with me and we skied the full rescue gully in the best conditions that we skied the entire trip. And the great thing about going up there with skis and split board was that for all the storm days we had, because the rangers said it was the worst weather on the mountain since the 90s this year, was terrible climbing weather equals great skiing weather. So we skied fresh powder almost every day.
Kind of a hypothetical for you on the GI distress. Do you think it was something to do more with like the like protein content and like lactate content, or do you think it was just dehydration, altitude?
I don't think it was dehydration.
Okay.
It like altitude, no matter what you do, is going to make you feel unfit. I think it was a combination of like GI distress and like the powdered milk not sitting well, and then also for me and one other member of the team, it was just the fatigue from dragging the sleds, and then not recovering as well at 14,000 feet. So the day before we did that push, the team was planning on doing like a 3,000 vertical foot day because they wanted to get uh up on the ridge between 16,000 feet and the fixed lines over to 17,000 foot camp. And I was like, hey guys, like we haven't taken a full rest day yet. Like we've been doing at least 1,000 vertical feet a day. And we ended up covering over 33,000 vertical feet on the mountain while we were up there. And so like we ended up taking, like we talked, and we ended up taking that full rest day instead of going up. And it just so happened that a weather window opened the next day. So it turned into, like, 2020 hindsight, a great decision for us. But I would say for our team, we were almost too excited to go skiing every day, which led to some lingering fatigue.
That makes sense. So not quite enough like total rest days because you guys were like going out, hitting the snow, enjoying the powder.
Yeah. And like from fitness standards and metrics, we went into this trip with because we were going from 14,000 feet to the summit was our plan. There were two metrics that we set for the team. One was the ability ascend 2,000 vertical feet per hour for 3 hours straight. So whether that be a 2,000 foot slope and do it 3 times or whatever, but 2,000 vertical 3 feet for continuously for 3 hours. And then the second one was doing a 13,000 vertical foot weekend. We did that instead of like a big like 9 or 10,000 foot day because it showed the ability to recover and repeat the effort the second day.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. All right, I've got 12:58, so I'll stick around for another 2 minutes. If there are any additional questions, I see there, nope, none in the chat. So if y'all have any questions, please send them my way. If not, I will post on the Tactical Alpinism Instagram the link to the recording once I upload it. If you want to reference back to this, and I'll also post the resources in the link tree to that page. And then if you text me, or excuse me, direct message me for those that found this through Facebook, if you direct message me asking for the links, then I will send you the links through Facebook as well. So I'll stand by if there are any other questions in the last little bit of time we have. If not, thank you for joining. All right, nothing heard. Have a great rest of your day, y'all.